everybody, and welcome to Two Catholics Thinking, where you get Brenden Bell and Cady, two guys who are just thinking through the faith and trying to unpack it a little bit so we can understand it better. And we are inviting you to be a part of that conversation. So thanks for tuning in, and hopefully this will be not a complete waste of time. Like I said, my name is Cady, Director of Faith Formation here at St. Timothy's. This is Brenden Bell, who also works as Coordinator of Faith Formation in the office. So Brenden, thanks for taking the time to chat today.
Thank you.
So we decided to start doing these videos again as a way to kind of unpack certain truths and practices that we have as Catholics and see how we can make more sense of them. And like I said, hopefully have a conversation that becomes somewhat illuminating, not just for you, but also even for ourselves as we try to learn from one another and kind of journey together in understanding the faith and living out the faith. So for this first topic, we thought it'd be worthwhile to explore the question of Jesus's nature. We hear in Catholic teaching that Jesus is fully God and fully man, but there's this question of what exactly does that mean, and how can that be, and why would God do that, and all these sorts of questions I think that are worth reflecting upon kind of come to mind when we hear that topic. So I'm just going to toss that out there to you, Brenden. When you hear this idea that we believe that Jesus is fully God and fully man, this is one of the key teachings of Christianity. It's one of those unique things that makes us Christian. What does that mean to you? Kind of how did you come to understand or internalize that belief?
Well, I mean, I think that you said something that was really interesting. Chesterton makes a point about the incarnation being the central idea to Christendom, the central idea to the Christian religion. And so I think that that's very important because no other religion in the world says that God became man. I mean, there's mentions of like the gods coming down in human form, and there's things like Hercules, which is like half god and half human. But there's no religion other than Christianity that says God, the eternal being from all existence, the creator of everything, became a baby. No one else does that. And so I think that to approach it is one way of thinking about it, what it's not, because it's not Hercules. It's not, Jesus isn't 50% human and 50% divine. He's 100. And that's confusing. I mean, it's complicated, but it also comes with a lot of beautiful realities and truths behind it. And because of that, we're met with like, the way I see it is we get the best of both worlds. We get the best of everything. God is now very approachable because he's like us, but he's still God. And he can help save us from whatever mess we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I think to me, you're right. The incarnation, this idea of the eternal Son of God taking on human form and coming to dwell among us, to me is part of what makes Christianity truly so profoundly beautiful. That we have a God who is wholly other, right? So like he's in many ways unlike us in any possible way, but then also takes upon the very nature that we experience reality through, like this willingness to be both present among us in an intimate way, even though he is the transcendent eternal God. And so this image of, like we hear in John's gospel, right, that the word was with God in the beginning, the word was God, all things came to be through him. But then at a point in time in our history, that word was made flesh and dwelt among us. And I believe like the actual like Greek terms that are used for dwelt among us is like he came and pitched his tent among us, right? Like this willingness to kind of really rest with and enter into and journey with humanity. This, to me, that in itself is like reveals God's saving nature, right? I think sometimes we think that Jesus came, he did some cool stuff, taught some nice things, and then he got to Good Friday when he saved us. But from the incarnation itself, like that becomes like a saving action where God in his very person is what he came to do, which is like the restoration of unity between humanity and divinity, which I think is just so beautiful.
And I think that you mentioned that I think that the incarnation of Jesus becoming, the Word, the Logos becoming human, and the Word becoming flesh, is just this desire of God to be with his people, like from the very beginning with God walking with Adam in the cool of the day to the God having the tent and the tabernacle with the Israelites as they're walking through the desert, This all the marriage imagery that you see in the prophets, where God is saying, "I'm going to marry Israel. I'm going to be there like a husband to his bride." All of that stuff is ultimately fulfilled with Jesus. Here, it's like he is the meeting place of God and man, because in his person, God and man meet, because he's both fully human and fully divine. And that becomes the place that we can encounter God in the most intimate way, but it's also the most transcendent.
Yeah, I think too that there's almost like this dual revelation that we get with Jesus. We often think of Jesus as obviously like being the fullness of God's revelation to us, right? In Jesus, we see God's truest self on display, right? God comes to make himself known in the most intimate way possible. But as John Paul II often said, Jesus not only reveals God to man, but man to himself. Like in Jesus, we see humanity done rightly. We see what man's proper relationship with God and neighbor ought to be. And so in some ways, Jesus is like the focal point of God's revelation, but he's also like the focal point of like true realized humanity, right? And so again, I think that that's just this beauty of truly walking with Jesus as the leader and perfecter of faith. That when we come to meet Jesus, we meet not only God who's come to meet us, but also we meet one like us who walks with us and kind of forges the way in right relationship with God and right relationship with neighbor. So I think it's just fascinating, this so much packed into this idea of the incarnation. But let's get into like the meat and potatoes. So what this means then, as the church says, is that Jesus ultimately has two natures. He has two wills. He has two intellects. He has a true created soul. And I think these are the types of things that for me make Christology, right, the study of the nature of Jesus, very fascinating. Because even if you think of the divine intellect that Jesus has as the eternal word of God, but also the human intellect that he has, which is a created intellect. I remember when I was studying Christology, St. Thomas Aquinas said that even Jesus's like natural human intellect is incapable of comprehending his divinity. And I was like, what? Like obviously like Jesus understands his divinity, but the full like impact of the eternal God can't be even like contained within the finite mind of the human nature of Jesus, right? And I think this raises all sorts of interesting questions too about Jesus's knowledge. Like this, did Jesus know quantum physics? Like, well, of course Jesus knew, the person knew it, right? But did quantum physics register on the human intellect of Jesus? Like maybe not, because again, he had a real human experience that was kind of formed in the same way that his time and culture like dictated. These to me are like part of the fascinating mysteries of reflecting upon Christianity that I think it's okay to like be uncertain of, right? To rest and soak in the mystery rather than think it's like a puzzle we've got to figure out.
Yeah, it's kind of like the whole thing in Matthew's gospel where Jesus says about the end of the world, no one knows the day nor the hour, not the angels in heaven, not even the Son, but only the Father. And it's like, how is that possible? Like how? And I think that distinction of Jesus' human intellect and divine intellect is at least one interpretive understanding of that passage. That Jesus in his human intellect hasn't been revealed, the end of the world time of the end of the world, and which is one of those things where I always shy from prophecy, because like Jesus doesn't know, who else knows? But that is a strange kind of thing, and it does open up a lot of questions, and it is kind of a moment where we just have to kind of fall silent before the mystery, that we're just like if Jesus can't, in his human intellect can't comprehend the fullness of his divinity, then we're not going to get there either. I mean, he's the perfect man, so he's got the best intellect, not clouded by sin, not clouded by any of the defects that we have. That is just, it is one of those moments where your brain kind of explodes.
Yeah, totally. So, the theological tradition refers to this as the hypostatic union, which I think is a term that's worth kind of throwing out there, just so that at least we're familiar with it, that we've heard it. And so the way I kind of understand the hypostatic union is St. Thomas Aquinas referred to a hypostasis as a complete subsisting thing of a rational nature. So the idea is that there was this question: if Jesus is the union of humanity and divinity, the question is, where did that union take place? Did it take place in the nature, or did it take place in the person? And he says it couldn't have taken place in the nature, because then Jesus would be like some like nature cocktail, right? He would be neither be divine nor human. He would be some mixture of the two. And so that can't be where like the focal point of the union. So he says instead the union has to take place in the person, in the hypostasis. And so the hypostatic union is simply the union of human nature and a divine nature in the one person, of the one hypostasis of Jesus. And I think if you think about it this way, you and I have a common human nature, right? Like we're both humans, we're part of human nature. But I'm a particular instance of human nature, and you're a different instance of human nature, right? We're not the same person. Um, Jesus too takes on our human nature, and he's a particular instance of human nature. The difference is, when I was conceived in my mother's womb, a new instance of human nature came into being, and a new person came into being. And when you were conceived in your mother's womb, a new instance of human nature came into being, and a new person came into being. But when Jesus was conceived in the womb of Mary, his mother, a new instance of human nature came into being, but a new person did come into being. That person was the eternal Son, the eternal person of the Word of God. And to me, that helps make some sense around how Jesus can be a divine person, but a person with both a human and a divine nature.
Yeah, I think that the distinction is good to kind of think about what happened at the incarnation, like that there wasn't a new person created, like kind of that the view, not be necessarily Arian heresy, because they kind of thought of Jesus as kind of like an angel that took on human form. But
I think that was Nestorius, right? Nestorianism says that Jesus is both a divine person and a human person, kind of side by side. And, yeah.
Which is kind of weird, because I mean that then there would be kind of an identity crisis in
Right.
Jesus, because it's like he's like two persons in one body, and that's like schizophrenic. No schizophrenic Jesus. And now I know that's kind of like these things can almost feel like splitting of hairs, because it's like, well, wait a minute, you said he has a divine intellect and a human intellect. But I think that unity of the person, the hypostasis, is very important, because when I go to Jesus the person who is both human and divine, which is why we can say that Mary is the mother of God, because Mary is the mother of the person of Jesus. She didn't just give birth to an essence; she gave birth to a person. And so she becomes the mother of the person, the divine person of the Logos, the second person of the Trinity, precisely in his human nature. And so, and I think that avoids a lot of confusion, a lot of things, because you're not, like, as you said, the cocktail, if you mix it up in the person, where it's like, well, there's 51% divine and 49% human. You're leaving something out. And Jesus wouldn't be the full revelation of divinity. He wouldn't be the full revelation of humanity if he was only half and half.
Right.
And so
I think what's fast. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So you get both. Like I said, this is the wonder of the Catholic both and. He's both human and divine, and so it's everything.
To me, one of the fascinating things is to really consider. So we know Jesus is the one who kind of is, again, the full embodiment of God's revelation, full embodiment of God's plan of salvation for the world. And yet he came on the scene and lived most of his life relatively unknown and in obscurity. Like, he didn't just roll into Jerusalem one day as a 30-year-old man and be like, all right, listen to me, kingdom of God is at hand. And 3 years later, he's crucified and risen from the dead. Like, he lived for 30 years of his life without really us knowing much of anything about his life. And the Catechism, in reflecting upon this, refers to Jesus' hidden years, where he lives the life of an ordinary person, right? Like an ordinary man of labor, of family life, of community and culture and religious faith. And it says in there that by doing those things, Jesus has like consecrated the ordinary. So in a very real sense, like, there is nothing ordinary anymore. Like housework and changing a diaper and washing dishes, like, these things no longer are simply ordinary, because Jesus has sanctified the ordinary by kind of integrating his divine life into them. And to me, again, that's a beautiful image of God's great love and his great care, but this willingness to not just save us from afar or to kind of reach down from above to pull us up, but to to kind of come and enter into our fallenness. And we see this on display in Jesus's baptism, right? Like it'd be like Jesus showing up for the confession line, being like, "What's up, guys? Like I'm here with you." Right? He goes to the very place where humanity has realized its fallenness and says, "As far as you've gone to stray from me, that's how far I'm willing to go to meet you and to journey with you and accompany you back to the Father." To me, that's what makes like the gospel of Jesus Christ truly like beautiful and truly like good news, that we have a God who doesn't come just like wagging his finger at our sin, but say, no, you guys are broken, you guys are lost, let me come help you, right? You are sheep without a shepherd, let me come find you and walk with you back to the Father.
And it feels very much like the image in Genesis where God kneels down in the clay, in the muck, to form man out of the clay, out of the dirt, and breathing into his nostrils the breath of life. It's very tangible, very incarnational, sacramental language and imagery there, which it's kind of interesting that we have those two stories of creation, because one, God just speaks and it happens in the first story, and then the second story you got the whole him coming down and doing that. And I think you see both of those in Jesus. At certain times he'll heal people just by saying a word and doesn't even come to them, doesn't even go there, he just speaks it and it happens. And other times he's like spitting on the ground and forming clay and smearing it on the person's eyes. And so there's this very that transcendence and immanence of God coming, that he makes the distant come to the most intimate, most tangible place. And like you said, it everything has been sanctified, everything has been transformed. It doesn't matter what we're doing. Everything becomes prayer, because Jesus did that. Jesus walked, Jesus worked, Jesus, sat around and told stories with his friends.
Yeah. I think that you mentioned this idea of a sacrament, this sacramental nature, and to me, I think the incarnation is like the only way to make sense of the sacraments, right? And in a very real sense, Jesus is like the first and primordial sacrament. Because you can imagine if what a sacrament is like a tangible way of having access to the intangible God, right? That's precisely what Jesus is. Like you can imagine, like when St. Thomas Aquinas asks the question of why the Word was made flesh, right? And was it necessary? He says, well, strictly speaking, it wasn't necessary because God could have saved us any way he wanted to. But practically speaking, it was necessary. And he says, because it was most fitting. And I remember the first time I read that, I was like, all right, Aquinas, like that was the best answer you could come up with, that it was most fitting, But in reality, like that's the only answer that could be given. Like God essentially thought, what's the most conducive way to make my intangible self known to these people who experience reality through their humanity, through their senses? I'm going to take on their humanity itself, right? And so Jesus becomes like the first and primordial sacrament, the instrument through which God's kind of invisible, intangible self becomes visible and tangible among us. And then the sacraments are simply God's continuation of this incarnational way of making his grace known. Right? Like God ultimately doesn't need water to make us reborn as beloved sons and daughters of God, but he has chosen to do so because, again, it's a tangible encounter with the intangible power of God present in the sacraments. So to me, I think the understanding of the incarnation goes hand in hand with an understanding of why Jesus gave us a sacramental church to begin with.
And I think it's God knowing us, knowing our reality, knowing that we experience things in tangible ways in the senses and stuff. And like I mean, it's not very popular now, but we still crave ritual. We want that. I mean, you see that in Super Bowl Sunday. We all have our weird superstitions where I got to have my jersey on inside out and wear the same socks for 3 weeks or something like that. Like we do those things even without thinking about it. And so we need that kind of connection that recognizes that when I see the water, I feel the water coming upon me. I smell the chrism, or I love the smell of incense. I just absolutely love the smell of incense, because to me, I smell that and I think church. I think I'm in the presence of something holy. And so that's why Jesus comes to us in this incarnational way, in this sacramental way, because we experience those things in that tangible, sensible, almost, dare I say, sensual way.
Totally. So at the end of the day, like what do we do with this? Like, how do we take this to prayer? How do we take this to further reflection? What impact should this have on our daily faith, our daily walk with the Lord, our lives as disciples?
Well, I think I go back to in the creed it says consubstantial with the Father, of the same substance or of the same nature. Um, and I think we can say in that same sense that he's also consubstantial with us. He has the same nature. So in that we recognize that Jesus is this bridge between us and the Father. And so he's like me. I remember in the movie The Shack, the guy's visiting the three. He's visiting the Trinity, and they're anthropomorphized as different people. And he's sitting next to Jesus, and he says, "I feel more comfortable with you." And Jesus says to him, "That's probably because I'm human." And so that comfort level that we have with Jesus, because he is human, leads us into that relationship with the Father and with the Holy Spirit. And so that bridge that we have, that step into the divine through Christ, and obviously through the sacraments that perpetuates that his presence here on earth. And so I think the best one is the Eucharist, is like Eucharistic adoration. If you go there and you sit it looks like a bread in a glass case, but I hear him speak to me in that, and I know he's present. Like, and there's something important about that ability to go to a specific place and to experience Christ in a physical way.
Yeah, and again, the Eucharist, this willingness of God to confine himself in a certain sense to something so small, right? Like the enormous God willing to become small in order to commune with us, like to literally to feed us and sustain us is beautiful. To me, I'm reminded of the fact that because Jesus lived a truly human life, like he can sympathize with us, right? Like he understands what it means to journey through this life. And so even as simple as like remembering, like Jesus got tired, he had to rest, he had to take a nap, like he had to eat food, he had to go to the bathroom, like he had to do the things that we have to do to kind of journey through this life. But he also experienced, the hardship of losing a friend. He experienced the pain of being abandoned by his closest friends at his hour of need. Like he experienced the true human lot. And so as St. Paul says, we don't have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with us and our weaknesses, but instead has like entered into them in order to transform and redeem them. And so this image of Jesus as like the brother, right, who leads the way, who forges the way of how to like navigate the world and how to navigate life. To me, that's the beauty of truly like friendship with Jesus. And it's sad because social media in some ways is like robbed us of the true meaning of like what a friend is. Like Jesus doesn't just like our posts, and that's it. Like we have a true like brother that we have communion with, that we have fellowship with. And I liken it to like Jesus enters into our world, and like in Terminator 2, this great scene where Arnold comes and he sees Sarah and he says, "Come with me if you want to live," right? Like he goes to right where the need is and says, "Come with me." Like I'll grab you by the hand, I'll lead the way, but come and follow me. So to me, it has great implications for discipleship. Jesus doesn't, again, just like tell us what we're supposed to do in relation to God and others. He lives it and models it for us. And so I think that, to me, what I think is always helpful also is the Catechism speaks of 4 reasons for the incarnation. And to me, I'm a big nerd, so I think that's always worthwhile to like memorize stuff. And so I think that if we can try to memorize even these 4 reasons for the incarnation, I think it will help us make sense of Jesus's life. These are in paragraph, I think, 457 through 460 in the Catechism. And this is the first reason the Word was made flesh, was to save us by reconciling us to the Father. Right? This idea that through sin we had lost relationship with God. Jesus comes as the instrument of reconciliation to bring a restoration of friendship, a restoration of union with God. Jesus came to show us God's love. Like we see just how much the Father loves us, that He's willing to enter into death itself in order to overcome sin, in order to draw us back to Himself. Jesus becomes our model of holiness, right? He shows us what, again, love of God, love of neighbor actually looks like. He shows us how we are to live in this world. And then Jesus came to make us partakers of the divine nature. And this is this beautiful image that like the Son of God was made man so that he might make men gods, is what, the early fathers used to say. Now, this doesn't mean we'll become gods, like rivals of God or anything like that, but like he entered into our nature so that we could participate in his nature. And that's like that's the beauty and the mystery of like of salvation, of eternal life, is that God's very life, who is a communion of life, love, and goodness, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, like we're invited into that, not just to like look at it from the outside and be like, oh, that looks like a fun party going on in there. Like we're invited to enter into the very life of God, the very life of the Trinity. What that will look like, we have no idea. St. Paul says, "Eye has not seen, ear has not heard," but ultimately, it's what we were created for. God is relationship, God is love, and we're made for that relationship. So I think these 4 reasons for the incarnation, I think, are a helpful way to even read the Gospels, right? As we're reading the life of Jesus, how was he doing these things throughout this particular episode? Again, to reconcile us to the Father, to reveal God's love, to be our model of holiness, and to make us partakers of the divine nature. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is obviously we could talk a lot more about this and unpack a lot more things. I think that, maybe something helpful, if you've never done it, if you want to check out the Catechism and see what the Catechism has to say about the nature of Jesus as true God and true man, there's a lot of great stuff in there, including some of the history of how these doctrines were formed. But anyway, this has been Two Catholics Thinking. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to the next time we can crack open another topic. So thanks, Brenden.
Thank you.